Okay, so we have a new episode of Legends and Leaders, and today it's great to have Fawn here. So you're somebody that's been, pretty entrepreneurial for a while. You had a PR company, now you have a different company more in the alcohol space. But you've had, certain difficulties in your upbringing. You moved to a lot of different areas. You had to overcome those types of hurdles of not really finding, kind of an easy home situation, but you were able to overcome that, and you've now become, I think, many people would agree that you're really an example of the American dream of entrepreneurship and what that can do to you. And you've written a book on this. You have, another book as well. So I'm excited to have you here and to get into your story.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Ben.
Awesome. So going back to the beginning, how did your passion for being entrepreneurial, for wanting to build your own business, to go on that kind of path with your life, how did that passion start?
I think I was just rebellious by nature. I questioned everything. I still do. So what suits me really well as an entrepreneur was absolutely a problem as a child and as a teenager. And it would have been a problem if I worked for people. And so it was a natural fit for me to lead, and it still is.
hmm So it's just something about you.
I have to say I was born this way. My ninth grade teacher, my English teacher, kicked me out of English class. And it wasn't because I was disruptive. It wasn't because of anything other than I challenged everything. I asked a lot of questions. Why are we reading novels when there are so many unbelievable nonfiction stories we could be learning about? Why are we writing reports on this when I've got a whole Encyclopedia Britannica that I would love to just dig into if you'd give us a topic and let us write from that? So I was constantly challenging. And she called my parents to my ninth grade class, and I'll never forget it. She's sitting behind her desk, and my mom, my dad, and I were on the other side. And she says, I don't know what kind of day I'm going to have until your daughter walks through the door. I am the only teacher in this class. And for that reason, I am kicking your daughter out of my class. It wasn't she talks a lot. It was none of that. It was truly that I've always challenged authority. I still do. I think it's a healthy trait. But as a child, those in authority didn't really appreciate that. And me being without power didn't really have many choices. And so I think I was just born that way. I wasn't a popular girl, so it's not like people were following me because I was the popular one. There was just something about me that caused people to look at what I was doing or saying and mirror that. And so I do think that there's the nature versus nurture. I do think that there are certain things that are truly nature. You have to nurture them through life. I've become a much greater leader now than I would have been when I was younger, but I do believe that it was a part of my nature.
It's interesting. So were you already trying to do entrepreneurial things like build your own businesses when you were young? When did that kind of start?
I really didn't. I don't remember. My husband did that more than I did for sure. Other than a typical lemonade stand, right? I really wasn't that. I think because I left home at 15, I dropped out of high school at 16. It just made more sense for me to begin something than to try to go work for someone else that is going to require a high school diploma or a college degree. And I didn't have either of those. And so I just created my own path.
So when you left home at 15, like what were you kind of thinking was going to be the way you were going to sustain yourself? And how did that start to evolve?
I wasn't thinking that at all. I wasn't thinking about anything. My parents gave me an ultimatum, which was essentially do things the way that we tell you to do it without challenging our authority, or leave our house. We pay for every bill here. And so you either do it our way. It was the shape up or ship out conversation. And I don't even know that I was there another hour. I packed my things. I called friends that lived in the projects in Jordan Downs in LA, and I took a bus, and it landed in Watts, California. And I got off that bus, and my new life began. And I'd have it no other way. It was important for me to go through every single phase that I went through. It was important for me to not be in a household, strong Christian household, that was molding and shaping me to really have two different lives. The life that you have at church and the life you really have. And I was determined to live a life in which every aspect of my life was merged. I didn't want to live two different lives. And I think that a lot of people in the church, that's what they do. And a lot of people their personal life and their work life are completely different. They have a work phone voice. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
they have, you have all these different things. And I said, no, I want to wake up in the morning the same Fawn Weaver as I go to bed at night, as I spend all day during the day. And so one of the things I've discovered in life is most people show up to most parts of their life as a representative of themselves, not as themselves. At home with a few friends, maybe a few drinks, they are themselves. But the majority of the time, they're showing up as a rep. And I refuse to do that.
Is that part of the reason you want to be in the whiskey business?
No, I didn't come into the whiskey business to be in the whiskey business. I came into the whiskey business because my goal was to share the story of the first known African American master distiller, his level of excellence. He is the teacher of Jack Daniel, the mentor of Jack Daniel, the first master distiller of Jack Daniel. So I was drawn to the fact that the entire world believed one story, and I singularly believed it was something else. And I wanted to prove that. And so I did. And as a part of that, and going and interviewing over 100 descendants of Nearest Green, interviewing pretty much every living descendant of Jack Daniel, or at the very least connecting with them and understanding why Nearest would not have been able to have his own liquor at the time that Jack was, and the fact that he wasn't allowed to patent, he wasn't allowed to trademark, he could not have gone out and sold his whiskey that he was making. And so it's such an amazing story. And I wanted to tell that story, not even because of the whiskey, but because of the nature of his relationship with Jack. It's so extraordinary that I truly believe it's one of our greatest American stories. And it's one of the few we can point to that is really positive, that took place in the South in the 19th century between a black man and a white man. And that's the story I wanted to tell.
And so along the way, you decided I'm going to actually make my own brand in this
It,
category.
it, that's a simplified version of it, but I would say that there were a lot of things that happened that made it make sense. Jack's eldest descendant, living descendant now, second eldest at the time, was the one the first day that I was in Lynchburg, Tennessee, doing research for the book. She said, hey, you know the farm where Jack grew up, where Nearest was the master distiller, yada, yada, yada. We now know that it was home to Jack Daniel Distillery number 7. And until at least around 1884, it was on this property. And it's a 313-acre farm, the original home where Jack grew up, beautiful home, all the rest of that stuff. She said, you realize it's for sale. And her cousin then takes me to go, my husband and I, to go see the property. We go see the property. We immediately make an offer on it because it was very clear that that was American history. We were going to be able to put that on the registry, which we now have. And that cousin who did real estate, as we continued to get to know each other, she said, hey, I know that you are planning to do a book and a movie, but if you ever decide to put his name on a bottle, I'll come out of retirement to make sure you get it right. So as it turns out, that person, our realtor, that was her second job. Her first job, which she had retired from after 31 years, was the family business. She was the head of whiskey operations for Jack Daniels. So there were so many things that happened that it would have made no sense to decide not to do the whiskey.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, everything seemed to really align there. But still,
Mm-hmm.
like, what was it like, Fawn, actually getting this off the ground, starting to get your first customers? Like, what did you do differently to really bring this out?
Well, I think coming into an industry in which independents don't succeed, you're coming into an industry where 6 spirit conglomerates control more than 90% of the alcohol that is sold in this country. They run the distributors network, and which is what is required to get your booze out. And there's a reason that no independent other than Tito's has succeeded. And so I'm coming into a space in which I know the likelihood of success is 0.000000. Just keep those zeros running till you finally get to a 1. I knew that coming into it. I also knew that no woman or person of color had ever succeeded in this industry. And so I'm coming into this space knowing everything is stacked against me. And the ability to raise capital was going to be very difficult. Forget that I'm a woman, forget that I'm a person of color. It was risky business. This story is smack dab in the middle of Jack Daniel's story. At the time was a $24 billion company. It's now worth a lot more now. But who knew how many grenades they would throw at us? And in my book, Love and Whiskey, I talk about a few of them. But this was a very risky venture. And so every difficulty you could imagine to get this off the ground, just write down a list, and I dealt with all of
Wow, so crazy what you had to go through.
them. Mhm.
But it's good you overcame it. What do you think motivated you to keep going?
I think the way that everything lined up, it made it very clear that this was destiny, that this was intentional, that this was meant to be. This wasn't some loosey harebrained scheme that I came up with and was working with all my might to make it succeed. This was something that I was clearly chosen to do. I believe that. And the cementing of this legacy was enormously important to somebody. And so being able to be this armor bearer, standard bearer, this uh, keeper of the legacy, whatever you want to call it, is an enormous honor. And so giving up isn't an option. I have so many people, so many women and people of color, 70% of this country. And I can feel them rooting me on every single day. Because if I can do it in this industry, they can do it in every industry. And so this isn't just about the spirits business. It's not just about whiskey. It's about succeeding for all of us.
So it's a bigger mission.
Much bigger.
So, what went into actually making your specific signature type of drink?
First of all, Sherry Moore came in. So this is Jack's family coming in as head of whiskey operations. And then Victoria Edie Butler, Nearest Green's great great granddaughter, came in as master blender. So Uncle Nearest Premium Whiskey is the most awarded bourbon and American whiskey of the last 6 years in a row. From 2019 until today, no one has garnered more awards than us. No one's even come close. And I do believe that it has everything to do with Nearest Green's bloodline being responsible for every drop of liquid that goes into our bottles. So what makes it unique is Victoria, unlike other master blenders, she doesn't proof down the spirit and she doesn't swish it around her mouth and spit it out to look for flaws. She's looking for perfection. She's looking for what allows me to get to that double gold, what allows me to take best in class at every award competition. And so she tastes directly from the barrel and she doesn't spit out. She consumes it so that she knows what consumers are going to taste with it going all the way down. And she's unapologetic about saying, this barrel is not ready. Yes, it's the same age as this barrel that was right next to it, but this one is not ready because the wood that is in barrels is what gives us 70% of the flavor and 100% of the color. And so every barrel's wood, depending on where the wood came from, they could be side by side in the warehouse aging, but one set of wood could come from Kentucky, one set could come from Tennessee. Those two trees are going to age differently.
That's fascinating how that works.
Mm-hmm.
Very different.
Yes.
Yeah. So, Fawn, you talk about a lot about how there wasn't that kind of recognition initially that you wanted to really bring out much more. You eventually started to really get that. You were the first African American to be on the cover of American Whiskey magazine. You started to get this recognition from the industry that you really wanted to have, especially on a legacy. What did that feel like to start to get that?
Well, I didn't care about me being out there. I actually preferred for me not to be out there. If I could build this brand and be completely behind the computer, not be out in the marketplace, I'm an introvert by nature. And I would love nothing more than to work behind a computer from my pajamas all day. That is ideal to me. I, however, am usually doing press 2-3 times a day, almost every day, 6 days a week at least. And so that's not my preference, but I feel enormously honored and grateful to have been chosen to do it. But I have no desire for my face to be plastered anywhere, only that it helps to lift up the brand and to tell the story of Nearest Green and his legacy. It's the only reason I do it. If it were for me, you wouldn't see my face anywhere.
I think it has really helped, though.
Oh, without question. This brand has been built on PR, on earned media. And I'm the one that's out there every day doing these interviews.
Yeah, definitely. So you've now scaled this to a bunch of different countries internationally. I think over 10 countries. What's kind of went into that effort to really successfully launch in all these different areas, which maybe the conveying the legacy here may have been more difficult to do in those other countries.
It's very little, and I'll tell you why I say that. Because 99.9% of our effort is here in the US. I believe we have so much room to grow here. We have an ability to continue to compete and to eventually dominate here. And so going into the other countries, it's simply seeding those countries. It's sharing the story. Love and whiskey going into those countries is enormously helpful because people are learning the story of Nearest Green even before they get the product Uncle Nearest or Nearest Green Tennessee whiskey. And so all of those countries are simply to seed. Our focus is on the US in terms of sales, in terms of marketing. And then in 12 other, I think we're now in closer to about 40 countries, mostly on our American military bases. And we begin there by sharing the story, and then they share with others. And so in all of these countries, we really are just seeding the story of Nearest Green, and the brand will come when the markets have enough name brand recognition, that's when we'll go into each one, truly go into them.
So the military has been a really good way to do that.
The military are incredible. And I spend a lot of time on our bases. I spend a lot of time with our troops. And they were drinking Uncle Nearest before I did that. And it
Yeah.
began with me doing a thank you tour to them for helping us to build this brand. And it's turned into so much more with me being able to go and spend time with the troops and do leadership sessions with them and help our older leaders communicate better with this new generation and get unstuck from their old ways and have this new generation understand why some of the policies are in place that there are in our different armed forces. And so I spent an enormous amount of time. I think at this point I've been to 45 of our bases and spent time with our troops. And my first international one was going to our bases in Germany, and I believe I'm heading to Italy in the not so distant future to go see our troops out there. And so right now, most of what we're doing is just seeding the ground and then also making sure our troops have what they want.
Mhm. So they really appreciate the effort you put in, I'm sure. I mean, you're visiting all these
Absolutely.
places. Yeah.
Absolutely. They know I don't have to. They know I could just send a salesperson if what I'm trying to do is sell. They understand that they mean a lot to me personally outside of my company. What they do, the sacrifice they make, the sacrifice their families make is really important to me.
Definitely. So you also decided to launch a venture fund, $50 million fund to back people that want to also build. Because I think you realized the struggles you had of getting started. What have you accomplished with the fund so far that you're most proud of, and what do you aspire to accomplish with that next?
Well, one of the things is we adjusted that completely and changed it to SPVs that were for specific brands. The idea when we first put the fund together was to put all of the brands that were really ready to take off, that were Black owned. We wanted to make sure that they got the capital they needed, because we know that almost no capital has ever gone to Black owned spirit companies. When you take Uncle Nearest out of the mix, it's a very, very small number. But as I began to dive in, I realized that there was only a handful of Black owned brands that were ready for that kind of capital. And so we had to step back and say, okay, what's the best way to do it? So we put together SPVs to get each one funded at the level they needed. Sorel needed 2 million, and Hella needed 5 million, and Equiano needed 2.5 million. And so we got each one the amount that they need. Freeland needed 4 million. We got them the amounts that they needed, but we did it in an SPV versus a fund, because I didn't want to sit on capital to deploy, and I knew that there were not the brands to be able to receive them.
Uh, so you're happy with kind of the way you structured it in the end was much better.
Very, very, absolutely.
And how have the results been so far?
The results are great. When you look at the Black owned brands in the marketplace that are doing the best, every single one of them are have the investments from Uncle Nearest.
That's great. It's good you've been able to support a lot of others too along your journey.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm grateful.
What do you also want to accomplish now with your book? What do you want people to get out of that?
Well, I think the book is, even though Uncle Nearest, the brand, is what will continue on for generations, we know that his name, his legacy is safe. We know that his story will never again be forgotten from 1979 until I brought this story forth. The story of who taught Jack and who was his first master distiller and all of this, it was completely different than the story when Jack was alive and when Jack's descendants ran the distillery. They were always very clear and giving the credit to Nearest and Nearest's boys, George and Eli. They never shied away from that. And once the company sold and it was taken over by another company that didn't see the value in sharing the story of Nearest and his boys, that the story not only disappeared, but all of a sudden it was a different story. And it was a white man and a preacher and a distiller who was the teacher and who was the mentor and all the rest of this stuff. And so having been able to correct that, I don't fear that this story will ever disappear. The bottle will ensure that. But I think it's important for people to understand how his story disappeared to begin with, for people to understand the legacy of excellence that he created during a period of time where African Americans were considered property, not people. I think that these things are important, but also I believe that Jack Daniel was likely the first case of business allyship we can point to in America. And so I think Jack also gives us an incredible blueprint for a number of things, for entrepreneurs especially. He laid down a blueprint that I'm to a certain extent following. There are certain marketing tactics and PR tactics that I use that I talk about in the book. I lifted those from Jack directly.
Yeah.
Things that he did in 1890 that are still very much so relevant today. Everybody's always looking for new and shiny. And I'm always looking for what's heritage, what's got roots, what has a story that actually matters, that resonates with people. What is the thing that someone overcame to get here? That's the part I want to replicate.
For sure. Yeah, I think that's smart too, because sometimes this stuff gets really overlooked.
Yeah, absolutely it does. It gets forgotten.
Hmm. So just the last question I have, what are some of your goals now at this point? What's your big picture vision for your life, your short-term goals, your long-term goals for your life, and then also for your company?
Well, I think in our industry, if you were to say Bacardi to a consumer would likely think of Bacardi rum. But within the industry, if you say Bacardi, no one thinks of Bacardi rum because that's not their moneymaker. We think of Patron tequila, which they own. We think of Grey Goose vodka, which they own. We think of Douce cognac, which they own. We think of a lot of things that are owned by Bacardi. And so what we're doing now, going from this year to next year, is going from Uncle Nearest being a brand to being an umbrella and owning a bourbon company, owning a Tennessee whiskey company, but also owning a cognac company and owning a vodka company. And so you're going to see us in 2025 really go from being a brand to a portfolio company. And that's the big vision, is to continue to grow that. And at some point to put Uncle Nearest's name right alongside the other big guys that have been running this industry since he was alive.
Yeah, well, it's definitely exciting. I look
Yeah.
forward to seeing how you're going to build this whole big vision out. I think you've been also able to provide a lot of great learnings through your book, so people should definitely check that out as well. And I appreciate you taking the time and doing this, Fawn. Wishing you much success.
I appreciate you. Thank you.